Thanks for that introduction, and also thanks for tying it back to what Mike was talking about this morning, because literally as I was sitting in the audience listening to Mike speak, I was like, this sounds like a commercial for Endeavor. So this is exactly what we do in emerging markets all over the world. Just so I have a sense, how many people here have actually heard of Endeavor before? Okay, so friendly audience. Don't throw things or anything. But just to give you guys the context, so I've actually been with Endeavor about 6.5 years. I live and work in San Francisco, and I run the global network of mentors, investors, and partners in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area that we connect to high-growth entrepreneurs in emerging markets around the world, including Mexico. So I'm really excited to talk to you today for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that I love talking about entrepreneurs. I love talking about Endeavor and what we do. I think it's awesome. Two is it's my first time in Punta Mita, which, pretty nice place. I got here yesterday and walked in the lobby and went, yeah, well, that's not ugly. This will do. And the third one is that I found out just a couple weeks ago that I got to do this talk in English, where when I signed up for it, I thought I was doing it in Español. So much better for all of us that it's in English. And I'm happy for the simultaneous translation. I do have a short couple of visuals I'm going to share with you today that's telling a little bit of the Endeavor story and talking a little bit about how you actually go about building global entrepreneurs. So I'm going to tell you a story that's actually about a few different places in the world that are not Mexico nor Silicon Valley. And so you can see the title there. This is the idea of how high-impact entrepreneurs. Oh, there was a presentation. Maybe it'll come back. Coming back potentially. How high-impact entrepreneurs, which is what we call these kind of amazing high-growth companies, really can change their companies, their communities, their cities, and ultimately their countries. So I feel very sort of blessed and lucky to have the chance to work with the amazing men and women who are Endeavor entrepreneurs. And what I'm going to share today is a study actually sort of hot off the presses that came out of our research group in New York that's called Endeavor Insight, looking at how these very kind of special entrepreneurs actually do change and lead their entire ecosystems. So I apologize in advance to the Mexicans in the room, but the first part of this story is actually not about Mexico. It's about a place called Argentina, which I understand might not be that popular to talk about. But don't worry, we're going to bash Argentina in the beginning. So this is the idea that, an entrepreneur in Argentina faces a ton of challenges. Argentina is a very, very tough place to do business. I would even call it a shitty place to do business, but it's live streaming, so I shouldn't say that. Oh, crap. Anyway, well, Inc. magazine last year called it one of the toughest places on earth to do business. It's really not an easy place. Economic ups and downs, kind of persistent inflation. I think the World Bank it's like the 123rd easiest place to do business in the world, right? Not doing very well. However, in spite of this, we've actually found that in Buenos Aires, the tech sector has seen pretty remarkable growth. And Endeavor is pretty interested in how did this actually happen, right? Because there's sort of hundreds of new tech firms starting up. There's a few top-tier global venture capital firms actually starting to make investments there. And really, even international firms from Silicon Valley, Google, Facebook, et cetera, have opened up offices in Argentina to take advantage of all the tech talent that's kind of happened there over the last 10 or 15 years. And so Endeavor's kind of interested in, well, how did this actually happen, right? And anecdotal evidence sort of from stories, from people talking to each other would suggest that it's precisely because of these very special entrepreneurs, these high growth success stories, these role models that really start this ecosystem going. So in the case of Argentina, it started with a company called Mercado Libre that was founded back in 1999 that Endeavor started working with in the year 2000 when they had just a couple employees. Fast forward to 2008, the company goes public on the NASDAQ. Today has a market cap of over $4 billion. So this is that kind of remarkable outsized success that Endeavor is looking for when we're talking about high-impact entrepreneurs. And we think it's really the beginning of how you build one of these ecosystems, right? So Hernan and Nico and Marcos, the guys who started Mercado Libre, actually inspired a company called Globant, which started in 2003, which Endeavor's been working since 2005, that we think will very likely be the next big success story you hear about in terms of going public in the United States and things like this. The boys from Globant, in turn, sort of mentored a company called Three Melons, which is the one over here on the right, which was a gaming studio down in Argentina that got acquired by Playdom. So they all sort of connect to each other, and we thought to ourselves, maybe there's something to this. I wonder if this is happening throughout the entire ecosystem. So what we did was we took our team in New York, our research team, and we actually surveyed the top sort of 200 technology entrepreneurs in Argentina. And we asked them these 5 questions. Who inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Where were you employed when you decided to become an entrepreneur? Who invested in your company? Who mentored you? And have you founded any additional companies? Because we were sort of trying to figure out how do you map this ecosystem. And we just did this year for the very first time. So Endeavor's been working for 15 years in Argentina, and this was the first time we really ever did this. And what we got was something that looks kind of like this. So if you go back, in the very beginning, this is 1996, there's only a couple of companies here, and there aren't really very many connections. If you go to 1999, there's a few more companies that have started, and you start to see those colored dotted lines, right? So the orange one is for mentorship, the pink is inspiration, the green is direct investing. The companies are kind of starting to be connected to each other a little bit. But you give it a few more years and something really interesting happens. You start to see a lot more companies, and some of the companies that have been there, the size of those circles increasing, that's sort of their influence on the ecosystem really starting to increase. And then you take it to last year, 2011, and what happens is 3 or 4 of these companies really just blow up to have a very outsized influence on everything that's happening, right? So this sort of supports what Mike was talking about the idea that a few entrepreneurs really do make a huge difference in an ecosystem like this. So you take these guys, in their case, these 3 sort of most influential companies, all super successful in their own right? So Mercado Libre is the one down here on the bottom. A guy called Wences Casares, who's a remarkable entrepreneur and sold Patagon.com. He's actually on his 4th or 5th company now, is the big orange circle towards the top. And then Ariel Ariete and his partner, which sold their company in digital ventures to Fox, now lead one of the leading accelerators in Argentina. So, in and of their own right, these guys are awesome entrepreneurs. But what's really interesting is the next piece. So if you look at the lines, these 3 companies, right, so the sort of 3 biggest entrepreneurs actually impact and affect over 80% of the companies in the ecosystem, right? So this is the Reid-Hoffman effect in Silicon Valley today. This is like the effect of a few really remarkable people touch almost everyone. And so this is really, for the first time, kind of a data-driven way of supporting what we knew anecdotally, that these high-impact entrepreneurs really do make the biggest difference. But we asked ourselves, like, okay, so this is awesome and this is really interesting, but is this only Argentina, right? Oh yeah, one more slide here. What ends up happening is all of this actually leads to overall sort of growth in the Argentina ecosystem in terms of Google opening their first office there, tech incubators starting to start, even the government getting involved in a positive way for the first time ever, and including just last year the first ever sort of venture capital fund, sort of funded by Argentines, run by Argentines, being started by 2 of the former entrepreneurs from Mercado Libre. That's Kazakh Ventures. But the question that's kind of interesting, I think, for us to look at today is, is this true outside of Buenos Aires? Is this a special thing for Argentina, or is this how these things work in other places, right? We know it kind of works like this in Silicon Valley. We've sort of been able to see that it can work like this in Argentina. So Endeavor actually looked at 2 other countries where we work. We looked at Amman, Jordan, and Istanbul, Turkey. Sort of, places that have their own very unique different challenges, but some surprising results, right? So Jordan actually has one of the most successful, true success stories, Maktub, coming out of the Middle East. It also keeps showing up on all these lists of sort of great places to build a startup, which is interesting, and people are like, Amman, really? And Turkey has actually had quite a bit of attention from global investors because of the market size, like Mexico, and a couple of exits actually over $100 million in the last few years. So the really awesome part, and this I totally new, just in the last couple of weeks research, but if you map these things, here's what they look like, right? So you have the same idea of 3 or 4 bubbles really having the most influence by far, and then they really do connect to everybody else. So that's 60, 70, 80% of all the technology companies in the whole sector being influenced by 3 or 4 companies. And that's a really remarkable thing to actually be able to show the data behind it. Now this is also happening in Mexico. So I don't have a super fancy bubble graph yet. We're actually working on doing these for every one of our countries. But what we do have are 10 years of operating in Mexico and more than 100 really awesome high-impact entrepreneurs, including 3 or 4 of which who are in the room. You guys want to raise your hands? I see Arturo. I know there's a few more here. But anyway, Daniela says they're outside. Okay. But these men and women, which we've screened from more than 3,000-4,000 companies to get 100 high-impact entrepreneurs in Mexico. They've created 17,000 jobs. They're growing more than 30% a year on average, which is the fastest growth rate of any country in the Endeavor network around the world. And this story is really starting to happen in Mexico as well, is my opinion, right? One of my roles in California today, I run this global investor network, because of which I've spent a lot of time with venture capital firms and growth equity investors from the US down in Brazil over the last 2 or 3 years, right? So Brazil's been a huge driver of all this kind of growth. But to that idea, the Wayne Gretzky quote earlier, right, of sort of, skating to where the puck is going, Brazil is happening, Turkey is happening. In my view, Mexico's next in terms of markets that are going to really be discovered by the global venture firms and by a lot of the growth equity investors. And having Mike and Ann here from Floodgate is just part of that story. So, this is really the way Endeavor thinks about how you create these kinds of entrepreneurs or how you help support them, right, through mentors, connections, and potentially partnerships. We do this in 17 countries now. We've selected 726 high-impact entrepreneurs around the world, and they in turn have created more than 200,000 jobs. Right, that portfolio of companies did about $5 billion in revenue last year, and we believe they're the ones that actually can have the biggest sort of outsized impact on their societies. So takeaways kind of, in my view, some of the lessons on building a high-impact entrepreneurship ecosystem, or I even think, this word ecosystem's gotten very, very popular. Yes, it's an ecosystem insofar as it needs lots of different players, but more than that, I think it's a movement. Right? It needs leaders. And that's one of the reasons that I'm excited about what you guys are building here today. And the reason I came down to be a part of this is, Mita Institute seems to be at the forefront of being one of these leaders, like Endeavor's trying to be one of these leaders. And you have to really kind of push this thing because an ecosystem won't just happen on its own, right? It's not that organic and magical. You need people to really kind of lead it and drive it. So our lessons that we take away from this are entrepreneur-led ecosystem development really works best. So yes, there's a role for government. Yes, there's a role for big corporates. There's a role for everybody. But the entrepreneurs have to really be at the center of everything you're doing. And it takes more than just startups, right? So it takes mentorship, and it takes this idea that the successful entrepreneurs, really do need to give themselves exposure and influence to others. And finally, I think if there's anything the crazy bubble graphs show, it's that, a small number of entrepreneurs, of high impact entrepreneurs really are critical to this, right? Without those role models and those success stories, it's hard to get everything else going. And then the last one, which is something that we're just starting to work on and kind of experiment with, but we're very interested in is, in Silicon Valley and in some places in the world, the best investors, angels and VCs, actually are the former operators and entrepreneurs themselves, right? So this is something we're starting to look at in Argentina. We're looking at other parts of Latin America, and I think someday we'll be interested in looking at in Mexico as well. I'm looking at you, Arturo. So at any rate, I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. I did time myself. 14 minutes, not bad. So that was supposed to be 15, but basically that's all I brought in terms of slides. I think Robin did say we could have 3 or 4 more minutes if you guys had any questions. I'm happy to talk about basically anything, right? I spend my life on an airplane these days, between Silicon Valley and the emerging markets. I really do think the emerging world kind of beyond India and China is a major sort of trend and story for Silicon Valley today. And I do think that after Brazil and Turkey, which are the markets that are getting the most attention right now, actually Mexico, Russia, and Indonesia are the next 3. And that's sort of my perspective, right, as one crazy gringo. So anyway, I don't know if there's time for one or 2 questions.
Absolutely right. Right, is this one on? Great. Hi, thank you. My name is Nobuo Tsuka. I'm working for the IDB. So I should take credit for that because I funded the first Endeavor 10 years ago. But anyway.
Thank you very much, sir.
My question is actually, Endeavor kind of, have some threshold like $1 million as an annual sale to be qualified as Endeavor entrepreneur potentially, right? So my question is how to get there, the $1 million sales company, and how did you find out? I mean, the structure, how to get the money, to have a mentorship before reaching out to $1 million company. How those entrepreneurs actually get to that level? Have you had that kind of research on that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I don't know if you guys heard the question. Endeavor does work with sort of growth stage companies, right? So we look for guys who already have between a few $100,000 and a few $1 million in revenue. Every country is different, so some countries actually have like $1 million minimum revenue threshold. Globally, we're flexible, right? It's a guideline, but the idea is that you have to be an entrepreneur who's already having some amount of success. So the question is, what do you do before that, right? And have we looked at that? And we're starting to actually study that because we do think that it really is sort of this network effect of accelerators, incubators, different sort of mentoring systems that can help entrepreneurs get to the level to actually qualify to become an Endeavor entrepreneur. We've actually experimented in a couple countries with us doing that, going down the food chain into those smaller sort of startups. What we've learned is we're not that good at it, right? So our skill set is really around sort of mentorship and growth for these hyper-growth companies after they're at this stage. And the startup stage is not one where we have a lot of leverage or have a lot of impact. So what we're trying to do is partner more and more with the emerging sort of accelerators and seed funds and angel groups and folks that do have kind of expertise in that. But the most honest answer is that's the hardest part, right? That part is really, really hard. And only a few of those companies will actually emerge to the next stage.
Another question?
Okay, awesome. So I think one thing Robin asked me to do is go ahead and bring up the next panel. So if you guys are out there and ready, if you have other questions about Endeavor, I will be here today and tomorrow, and obviously I love this stuff. Also, Daniela Calleja from our Mexico team will be moderating a panel this afternoon, so we can talk to you about it in English or Spanish or anything else you want to do. So the tie-in though, and sorry, I forgot one last transitionary comment. The next panel is actually going to be about universities and education and how they're really important to a culture of entrepreneurship. I think the connection between this and the universities is this is about making the role models that then you can expose to the next generation, right? So the comment earlier today about every successful entrepreneur, the top 20 in Mexico, should be out there in front of every 18 to 25-year-old, couldn't agree more, right? That's exactly kind of the way I think you make the biggest change for the next generation. And what Endeavor's trying to do in a near-term basis is create jobs and create revenue and create wealth in countries. But what we're trying to do on a long-term basis over the next 50 years, right, is change the way entrepreneurship is perceived in markets around the world, including Mexico. So with that, I'll shut up. I always talk too much.